Hello and welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ravlick and thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. Some of you who are regular listeners to the podcast will recall I spoke with Molly Selskog from the Supan Centre um, in about the middle of September about the fact that right-wing extremism is gathering steam not only in the United States but also elsewhere in the world. Now, why is it more of a concern in places like the US than others? Think about it. Right-wing extremists are able to get their hands on various kinds of firearms, and they can be the automatic weapons like the AR-15s and others that are um, particularly military style arms, and threats from those groups need to be taken seriously. And we're seeing that emerge both here domestically in Australia in terms of threat analysis, but also in the US, given the recent events over the past 9 months with COVID and the way in which right wing extremists have responded to left wing extreme activity as well. An organisation that supports the firearm um, possession arguments in the US is the National Rifle Association. The NRA is a major lobby. It has used its power to sway politicians, and it's done all sorts of things over the years to try and make sure that tougher gun laws aren't implemented in the US. A person who's done a lot of work looking at the NRA in recent years is Peter Charley, who is a part of the investigative team with Al Jazeera. And Peter's got a new book out looking at how to sell a massacre, which chronicles what is a 2 to 3 year period of looking at the NRA and a range of issues to do with the way in which it operates. Peter, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm very good, and congratulations on the book coming out.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Now, before we get into all the intricacies of what happened with the documentary series, and I understand a lot went into it, there are people who'll be listening to this who won't have come across you previously in some of your other work. What would your career look like if you had to sum it up on a post-it note?
Well, I've worked in newspapers, radio, and television around the world for about 40 years. I started as a newspaper reporter on the Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney, Australia, in 1975, and worked on all the Fairfax, or most of the Fairfax stable newspapers at the time. And I've worked in television in Australia and the United States, and worked for National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C. now. I lead the North American investigative unit for the Al Jazeera network, and that involved the undercover operation you referred to just then, where we infiltrated the National Rifle Association of America using hidden cameras to try to get a sense of what really goes on in that organization against a backdrop of rising mass shootings in America.
Now, going back to you, just taking it one step back. I mean, you probably downplayed some of the work you've done, because I recall you've had an extensive involvement in television and current affairs. I mean, you were the producer of Lateline, were you not, at one stage?
Yeah, I worked as a news and current affairs on-air reporter, and later as a producer in Australia. And my work as a producer in Australia involved 7 years as the executive producer of Lateline at the ABC from 2000 to 2007. And I was then poached by SBS to become the executive producer of the Dateline program at SBS. Worked there for another 7 years, leading Dateline up to 2014, when Al Jazeera approached me out of the blue to ask if I was interested in moving to the United States to head up their investigative unit there. in the Americas. And I've been there for about 6 years. So yeah, the TV experience in Australia did involve quite a lot of time as head of Late Line at the ABC. Yeah.
It's a program I remember well. And both of I watched it a fair bit when it was on, so it's probably important that we mention it now. Diving straight into How to Sell a Massacre. It was 2 hour long episodes, aired last year. You won a Walkley for it. What was the first seed or germ of an idea that led you to start this process? When did it begin?
Well, I've been thinking about the whole issue of gun violence in America for years. I lived in New York City for 10 years during the 1980s at a particularly violent time. In those days, I lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was a very rough and tumble part of town in those days. Lots of gun violence, so I'd often go to sleep at night to the sound of gunshots ringing out around the neighborhood. New York was cleaned up, after that, and it became, relatively safe in comparison to those days. But right back then, I was very interested in the whole notion of gun violence, and then, of course, the phenomenon of school shootings started up. At various high schools, and of course the tragic event at Sandy Hook in Connecticut, where so many young children under the age of 7 were massacred. I was watching with increasing dismay as gun violence seemed to consume America. It seemed to be out of control. Every time there was another school shooting or a mass shooting of any kind, America would gnash its teeth and wail and talk about thoughts and prayers and, say this is absolutely appalling, this should never happen again. And yet it would happen again. And then it would happen again. And then it would happen again. There didn't seem to be any way of stopping it. And of course, right at the forefront, as you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, is the National Rifle Association, representing gun owners of America, pushing hard for the sale and ownership of guns. Fiercely, ferociously pushing the Second Amendment of the US Constitution, which gives American citizens the right to keep and bear arms, and really framing the whole gun ownership issue as an idea of freedom, of personal freedom, indicating that those who advocate for gun control eating into freedoms, into fundamental US freedoms, and really freedoms around the world, really by extension. Against this kind of crazy series of events, I was very interested in finding out more about the NRA and how they operate, what they think and do. And that's when the germ of an idea, the germ that had really sort of developed as I watched gun violence increasing, was sort of planted, a seed was planted, so to speak, when I joined Al Jazeera and had the opportunity to engage in sort of long-form investigative journalism with the use of hidden cameras, which is what we were and continue to do a lot of. So there seemed to be the coming together of both the thoughts I had of gun violence and the opportunity to investigate it through Al Jazeera and its desire or its willingness to support very long-term investigations running into the years, and its willingness to bankroll those sorts of investigations, which is quite unique in the world, I think. I can't think of another television network that would have the desire or the ability to support something of that nature, the expense and time required for that sort of investigation. So those things came together, and the How to Sell a Massacre investigation got underway, ended up lasting 3 years.
3 years is a long time. Now, in the world of journalism, we normally try conventional methods to knock on people's doors and have a conversation. Had you tried engaging the NRA in discussion before um, the you began the process of uh, the covert investigation?
I'd watched my colleagues attempt on multiple occasions to engage with the NRA, usually after mass killings. The NRA is, as we found out in the course of the investigation, notoriously secretive and is very aggressive towards the media. So efforts to have a sort of rational discussion with the NRA about the issue of gun control, the reasons why gun violence was spiralling out of control. These are very, very difficult things. It struck me that the only way to really get into the heart of the organisation, to examine its finances, to get to know its executives, to determine whether there was any internal dissent, all of that sort of thing, which was the primary objective of this investigation originally, was to deploy hidden cameras and to engage in subterfuge and to go undercover. And the reason for that is that I was convinced there was no other way of determining what was really going on in that organisation.
Yeah, essentially, the way I read the play from having watched the documentary and observing the debate in the US from afar is that they tend to be fairly covert. Their arguments tend to be diversionary whenever there's an incident, and it seems they, as you pointed out during the 2 hour uh, the 2 hour long episodes rather, um, they seem to have a deep political influence in the US. Is that something that you found? How did you find that linkage between them and the US as you began to explore the issues?
Well, they are very influential politically, and they represent a base of at least 5 million people, or so they claim. That's 5 million voters in an election. They proselytize the idea of guns being good, guns being necessary to maintain freedom and security in America. That's a message that strikes a chord on the political front. We can see it right now with Donald Trump talking about law and order, the necessity for there to be order on the streets when there is such disorder with clashes between extreme left and extreme right, lots of street protests and disquiet and discord. The whole idea of let's bring law and order to bear, has political capital and has a lot of political purchase. So the NRA's argument that guns are there for self-protection, for law-abiding citizens, which is a term they always attach, is quite a potent political message that a lot of politicians are keen to embrace, not to mention the fact that the NRA uses a very effective carrot and stick approach in its political dealings, where politicians who don't toe the Second Amendment line are punished, and those who do are rewarded, often very richly rewarded financially. The NRA poured millions of dollars into Donald Trump's campaign in 2016. Not so much into this particular campaign now, because the NRA is actually undergoing its own internal fractions and fractures, internal dissent, and there are various problems sort of tearing the NRA not entirely apart, but tearing at its core. So it's undergoing its own it's experiencing its own traumas right now, undergoing its own transformations, but it's still a very, very powerful force politically.
Yeah. The other thing that was clear through watching the 2 hours that aired here in Australia. I first watched the 2 episodes on YouTube, by the way, when they were uploaded by Al Jazeera onto the site, was the use of rhetorical tools to deflect people from the core of the policy debate. What observations did you come away with when you saw the way in which the NRA laid out the the propaganda lines that they use every time?
Well, I was horrified to hear from our secretly recorded conversations, the NRA providing very clear advice to the One Nation political party, but I'm sure they've provided this advice to other political parties who have sought their assistance. Advice on how to deal with pesky journalists asking questions. They basically laid out their blueprint for how to deflect, how to suppress news, how to attempt to capture the news agenda by engaging the services of ghostwriters and that sort of thing. I mean, I was absolutely horrified to hear all these, these tools of that dark trade, if you like, laid bare in these secret recordings. But it all made sense because this is exactly what the NRA has been doing in its efforts to smash down media interest in gun violence. Media inquiries about ongoing gun violence and mass shooting events are a real pain for the NRA. The NRA doesn't want these. They're very inconvenient truths. And the NRA has now a very effective way of dealing with it, which they laid out to One Nation. It was really quite startling and horrifying to see it.
Now, the interesting thing about the documentary is that I suspect the liaison with One Nation was what ended up getting Roger Muller, as the head of the organisation who set up Gun Rights Australia into the NRA in the first place. Am I correct in my reading of that?
Yeah, I mean the idea of sending Roger in undercover was to the methodology that we used was to create an organisation that presented to the NRA precisely the arguments that they give themselves. So it was basically a clone of the NRA, calling itself Gun Rights Australia, singing from the same hymn book as the NRA. So the NRA would see them as brothers in arms and welcome them in. That was the whole idea of it, and that worked. The NRA saw Roger Muller and his Gun Rights Australia group as comrades, and they ushered them through the doors of the fortress. And once inside, we started rolling with our hidden cameras. So, yeah, I mean that ruse worked.
Yeah. And were they more discursive when One Nation guys were present? Here I'm talking about obviously James Ashby and Steve Dixon, or were there were there greater disclosures made with Roger Muller himself?
I think the most striking material that emerged took place when One Nation was there, because the NRA saw One Nation as an opportunity to spread its message into Australia. This was part of our investigation, was to try to look at ways in which one nation was exporting its ideology to places overseas. This whole ideology of guns being good, guns being necessary, and more guns are good, and also actively trying to work against gun control measures. They were very effective in this role in Brazil, which had been debating legislation that would have constrained the use of guns in that country. The NRA was so troubled by that they actually dispatched people from the NRA to Brazil to work against that legislation, and they succeeded in doing so. As a result of that, Brazil has a major gun violence problem. They saw one nation as a way to get into the gun laws of Australia, which the NRA had openly despised. You know, the John Howard's gun laws introduced after the Port Arthur massacre. And the NRA, once One Nation was on the scene, was enlivened more so than just with Roger. They were much more sort of revelatory, if you like, when One Nation was sitting there with them.
It's one of the interesting things in all of this, apart from the fact that the NRA perceived a political link into Australia being some sort of advantage, is the manner in which sort of they seek to branch out. You mentioned the issue in Brazil earlier. What are these things are never done, Peter, solely for sensational purposes. They're done to educate people, right? It's not always obvious when the thing comes out, the sensational coverage, etc., etc. What are the core lessons that you believe, firstly, policymakers need to take away from the work you've done when it comes to dealing with pressure groups?
Well, I think pressure groups like the NRA, distort. They're there to distort the truth. I think all lobbyists effectively try to define the truth, of course, along the lines that best suit their clients. The NRA was there to present in my view, completely false sense of reality. That is that America is in a state of chaos, that crime is out of control, everyone's under threat, women are at risk of being raped all the time, creating this false sense of danger, this social construct that does not really exist. America isn't really like that, and I've lived there for 16 years. I know the place well. Probably have spent more like closer to 20 years there on and off with various assignments. There are danger zones in America, no question about it. There are some parts of America that are extremely dangerous. South side of Chicago, parts of Baltimore, New York is becoming more dangerous. There are, South Central LA, there are places that are very dangerous, no doubt about it. But the whole country is not. And the NRA would have you believe that the whole country is. And the only way to really keep yourself safe and keep your family safe and a woman prevent herself from being raped is to carry a gun, preferably many guns, and be prepared to use them when the time comes. That to me is a falsehood. And as I say, these lobby groups, these pressure groups are there to present narratives that do not necessarily conform with the truth. That's what lobby groups do. They twist the truth. They invent so-called alternative truths, as Kellyanne Conway would have it. and they push out a narrative that is there to best service their clients and to make as much money as they can. So the key takeaway is that lobby groups can't be trusted, and they put, in some respects, and I don't believe this is an exaggeration, they put democracy at risk, I believe, because they are twisting the reality of what's really going on in the world in order to make money effectively.
Mm. There's something else that we've dealt with the policymaker side of it. Now, if we're looking at the people you and I do the work we do for, when we look through the eyes of the journalist at things and communicate, what are the people out there needing to do, Peter? What should they be thinking about when they're reading material produced by or incorporating the arguments of groups like the NRA and to be quite frank, other organisations that appear from time to time in the media?
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, people would be able to look at this sort of material in perspective and see it for what it is. It's it is often an exaggeration or a distortion of reality in order to service a corporate master. But the reality is, people, America is such a polarized and divided country now. People hear only what their respective echo chambers reflect back to them. It's very rare to find someone who might read NRA material and treat it with some skepticism or look for the other side of the matter. People who read NRA material are probably NRA adherents. And, I joined the NRA at the very beginning of this investigation under my real name, gave my real phone number, my real address in Washington, just to see what sort of propaganda they would deliver to me, what sort of stuff they'd send to me, what sort of stuff they'd email to me. And sure enough, there was a torrent of material that came through. I was getting emails every day from them, and I was getting lots and lots of material being sent to me via the post. The NRA it became clear to me just how effective the NRA is at pumping out its propaganda. And they do a very good job of that. They're very good at it. I don't think it's a good thing, but they are very good at it. And, I think people who at the receiving end, most people at the receiving end of that sort of stuff embrace it wholeheartely, and they wouldn't think of, trying to, get equal amount of material from an anti-gun lobby group or, anti-gun violence, doctors against gun violence or whatever. I think that's highly unlikely. So, those people are stuck in their echo chambers, as are the people on the other side. The doctors against gun violence would probably not want to receive NRA propaganda. Maybe one or two of them do, but most of them wouldn't. So, people have taken their sides and nailed their colours to the mast, so to speak. And, that's where they are, and that's their position.
There's something else that I reflect on whenever we see public discourse about, whether it be gun violence, whether it be terrorism, whether it be, the best way to treat COVID, whether it be, the debate over national security laws and inhibitions on freedom. There's something that keeps rolling back in my mind, and that is, what can we in the media do better when we're confronted with issues that have very deep-seated polarized views? Is there anything we can do better?
Well, look, I think we can take a leaf out of the pages, if that's the right expression, from outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times. The Washington Post, has a column where they regularly call out falsehoods or lies. They just list them, and they award as you may be aware, they award so-called Pinocchios to people who are telling lies. And, the Pinocchio is drawn in the newspaper as the puppet with the ever-expanding nose for every lie it tells. And various Pinocchios are awarded to politicians based on what the newspaper says is a genuine fact check. So, lots of fact checking. The New York Times is doing the same sort of thing. It doesn't award Pinocchios, but, there is a very robust fact checking unit at the New York Times that seeks to strip away the lies and falsehoods and, mistruths that spew forth from various politicians, more, in my view, from the Trump administration and the Trump campaign than the Biden one. But, I dare say Biden is distorting the truth himself in various areas. But the media should be looking straight down the centre and calling out lies whenever it sees them, trying not to take sides where possible. The problem with the US media now is that you have Fox Television on the extreme right and, various other sort of extreme right outfits like Breitbart, and, then you get sort of wacko online things like 4chan and 8chan and Gateway Pundits and so on. And then on the left, you have all the usual suspects: CNN, MSNBC. You have NPR and various groups where where they're coming from politically. It's all very predictable. There are very few people down the centre anymore. I'd say the New York Times is pretty much as centrist as you can be, although it does lean somewhat to the left, of course. But it's very difficult to find the straight path through in such a divided media landscape where organisations are so openly contemptuous of one side and openly supportive of another. There's a great sense of predictability in media coverage now, and that's a worry, I think.
It poses another question, doesn't it? Is it commercially viable to live in the centre?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because there is the commercial imperative, of course. People need to make money, and I think it is. I think there is a when I want to look at the news, I look at news all over the place because I'm interested in the news. I'm interested in the way people cover it. I'll look at Fox Television. I used to work at Fox Television once. I'll look at Fox Television. I'll look at NPR, listen to NPR. I used to work for NPR too. I'll read the New York Times. I have great respect for the Times, and many of its reporters are good friends of mine, and I just think they do a phenomenal job. Likewise with the Washington Post. I have friends who work there. I read the Post. It's, I think a fabulous paper. But I'll also read, I'll look at Breitbart. I'll listen to all the extreme right-wingers and left-wingers wherever I can to get, in my view, a great sense of the clearest sense of what's being said out there. I wouldn't take what Fox Television says as being gospel. You've got to take these. You've got to understand where these people are coming from and what they represent in order to have things in perspective and context. And it is increasingly difficult to find someone down the centre, I think.
It is. We're talking to you, 40 plus years down the track from when you started in journalism. Could you ever imagine when you first started in newspapers in the 70s that it would evolve into having this level of binary nature to it, this sort of partisanship to it?
No, I think I was very naive when I first started. I didn't even realise that I thought the Sydney Morning Herald was like, this magical place where truth, from which truth emerged. I just thought whatever was printed on the pages of the Sydney Morning Herald was true. And it was only later in life, as I started to understand more of the media and how it operates, that I realised that partisanship plays a very strong role in most media platforms. But I didn't think it would expand to the extremes that exist these days. And I had no way of imagining, of course, in 1975 when I was granted a cadetship on the Herald, that something such as the internet would ever exist. There are platforms that have emerged to push news out there that were just unimaginable in those days. So, there have been lots of developments that no one from the mid-70s could have ever predicted, that now play a very important role in the way the media is broadcast and received and interpreted. And of course, there is all the fake news, trolls and bots pushing out distortions. We saw a lot of this in the 2016 presidential campaign in the US, pushed out by Russia and Ukraine and so on, Macedonia. These fake news snippets going out on social media to distort public perception on things, generating, non-existent, generating issues, stirring emotion, and that sort of thing amongst groups that, if they'd been left alone, would probably have reacted very differently in the political environment.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting way to kind of conclude the conversation with you, Peter. Appreciate your time today. Where can people get their hands on How to Sell a Massacre, which chronicles the 3-year covert operation to look at the NRA? What's the best way of people getting hold of it?
Well, I would suggest going to a local bookshop. It's in bookshops around Australia. It is available on Amazon, but I like to support local bookshops. I love local bookshops. I just think I do appreciate Amazon ranking it as a number one bestseller in a number of categories, and it's gratifying to see that. It's great. But local bookshops around the country do have it in stock, or at least most of them do, I think. I'm in Australia at the moment, returning to America early next week. But the bookshops I've been into, with a couple of rare exceptions in remote places, have had the book stocked. So yeah, pop into the local bookshop and ask for it. And if they don't have it, they can probably get it in, or I hope they can anyway. And
right now with COVID, it's critical to get cash flow into businesses that would otherwise be in a bit of strife.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love the idea of supporting local bookshops. I think they're critically important places, and I've been very fortunate to have the support of some fabulous bookshops around Australia. In pushing the sale of my book, How to Sell a Massacre, and I appreciate that very much. I just think we need these places to survive, and COVID has presented all kinds of challenges, of course, for bricks and mortar establishments. It's just great to see bookshops still open and people still going into them, albeit not in the same numbers as pre-COVID, but hopefully one day it'll get back to the sort of traffic that existed before this bloody virus, took over and changed everything we do and the way we behave. It's just been absolutely insane.
You'll be flying, as you said, you're flying back to the US straight into the election environment. which will be an interesting period of time for everybody around the world, not just Peter Charley, I guess. How long do you think you've still got in the US, Peter?
Well, I'll definitely be there for the election. And I've been asked by Al Jazeera to relocate to Doha, the capital of Qatar, where Al Jazeera is headquartered, to take up a new role there, still in the investigative unit, a more senior managerial role, looking at the investigative output from around the world, not just the United States. That will probably happen once the COVID crisis passes. At the moment, Qatar has locked its borders. No one's allowed in or out, with the exception of local Qataris, I believe. So that's an impediment to what was a plan to leave the US and move to Qatar. But that'll happen, I think, probably fairly early in 2021. I hope. Otherwise, I'll just remain in America until things free up. But certainly for the election, on November 3, I will be in the US, and I'll be very interested to see how it all plays out. It's going to be fascinating.
Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
It's been great. Those of you listening, go check out Peter's book. Stay safe, look after each other, and no doubt, if you're in Victoria, you probably need to click and collect from a bookstore. But it'll be a worthwhile read. Take care, and I'll join you again fairly shortly.